Before we took a break, it's been about 2 months, almost exactly 2 months, we left off with the story of Abimelech. You remember Abimelech was the son of Gideon. So we finished with him to sort of round out the story of Gideon. And it almost serves as an epilogue. Now we're seeing a transition away from the Gideon narrative, and we're actually marching towards the Jephthah narrative. So the book of Judges is an oversimplification. The middle section, which dominates it, it's the story of disobedience, discipline, and deliverance. Those are the 3 Ds we've emphasized. And so we know the big names. These are Gideon, Samson, Jephthah, Deborah, Ehud, the big names. But sprinkled along the story are these no-name characters. So let's go ahead and just put all of them up. Here they are. You'll notice that these characters have 1 to 3 verses dedicated to them. We talked about Shamgar. Remember, we spent an entire week on that single verse. And you'll find that these guys, we don't have much information on them, but what we have is rather compact. And we'll look at Tola and Jair today, 2 verses each. Jair is actually 3 verses. It goes to verse 5. And then after the Jephthah story, we'll get these 3 gentlemen, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. And so you'll notice that there are 6 of them. And if my math is right and my counting is right, there are 6, if we can use the term minor judges, and I believe there are 6 major judges. If my math is right, because I've seen different numbers, but let's just assume I'm right just for the sake of argument, that would mean you have 2 6s. Now that's significant because when you read the Hebrew Bible, you're used to the number 7. The first verse in the Bible, 7 Hebrew words. Second verse in the Bible, 14 Hebrew words. How many times did the Israelites walk around Jericho? They did it for 7 days, and on the 7th day, they did it 7 times. I mean, it's just everywhere. So I don't think it's an accident you get 6 minor judges, 6 major judges, because that is the number of incompletion, number of man, number of sin. Because later, what do you get in Revelation? 666. You know, it's the number of man, it says. So here we have two interesting little vignettes, and there's not a lot of information here, but put together, I think we can come to a few conclusions. Let's look at the first one, verses 1 and 2. This is Judges 10. After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir. So, who in the world is this cat? Like, chances are, if you've read through your Bible, you know, and you made it to Judges, you made it out of the genealogies of, you know, of whatever book, or you made it through the tabernacle laws of Exodus. You've read this guy. You don't remember this, let's be honest. You don't remember it at all. I did Jabez today at the Capitol, and I started reading the genealogy of 1 Chronicles 4, and I think it was Keenan. Y'all met Keenan. He goes, please don't. Just don't. You know, so I stopped after like 1 verse. Like, you get the point. It's Jabez is surrounded by genealogies. So what do we know about this guy, Tola? Let's start with his name. Now, I'm going to, usually I save the Jesus stuff for the end. I want to start with the Jesus stuff because it may be a stretch, but I think you'll find this most fascinating. Okay, let's start with his name. His name means worm. Worm. I learned today, because I was doing Jabez. Jabez, of course, means pain, for he was born in pain. I learned, what does my name mean, Kyle Edward McDaniel? It means narrow wealth. Kyle is a Gaelic word meaning a narrow or a straight, something like that. Edward is an Anglo-Saxon word meaning wealth. Now, what is narrow wealth? It means you're poor. That's pretty much the way I'm reading that. So I am the son of Donald who was poor. That's basically what my name means. My father is William Donaldson McDaniel. So he is William, son of Donald, Donald's son, McDonald, son of McDonald. So he is son of Donald, son of Donald. So you do with that information whatever you want. Now, when we name people, we often don't actually think about the etymology. Let's be honest, particularly you ladies, I think, are worse at this, if I'm being honest. You pick names that are cute. So when you're pregnant, your mom, mother-in-law, sister, church ladies come up, have you chosen a name? And you say, whatever it is. And what do you want to hear? Oh, that's a cute name. That's all you care about. It can mean anything. Right? And you want to make sure it's a name of someone you know that you like. Like if you know someone with that name, you want to make sure you like them. I remember my wife and I talked about this, is we had one name we liked. We're like, knew a guy like that in high school? No, not doing that, That's about the extent of us picking names. In the ancient world, your name carried with it a significant meaning. For example, Jesus. Jesus is the Greek name for the Hebrew name Joshua, which means the Lord saves. When Rachel gave birth to Benjamin, you remember what she first named him? Ben-Onai, which means son of my sorrow, because she died. And you remember Jacob comes and says, we're not naming him son of sorrow. We're going to name him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. Names are important. So this guy means worm. Can I prove it to you? Because you may not believe me. What mother would name her son Worm? Well, apparently you've not been following the names celebrities have come up with. Women will do this. Moms will do this. And dads. So let me prove this name means worm. Exodus 16. They did not listen to Moses. Some left part of the manna till the morning, and it bred tola. There it is. And it stank. Worms filled it. Let's do another one. Isaiah 14:11. Our pomp is brought down to Sheol, the grave or the afterlife. It's a very debatable word. The sound of your hearts. Maggots are laid as a bed beneath you. Worms are your covers. Notice, by the way, notice how Sheol is described. Anyways, we can't get distracted by the word Sheol. Isaiah 66 is the very end of it. They shall go out and look on the dead bodies of the men who have rebelled against me, for their worm shall not die. That phrase sound familiar? Shows up in the New Testament in the description of Hades, hell, Gehenna, actually. Jonah 4:7. You remember in Jonah, right? He's going to go watch the city burn, and the tree goes up. What happened is a worm was appointed to attack the plant. Same word. It's a tola. Deuteronomy 28. You shall plant vineyards and dress them, but you shall neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worm, the tola, shall gather them. Two more. Psalm 22. This is a messianic prophecy. I am a worm. I am a tola, and not a man. Scorned by mankind, despised by the people. So this is a Psalm of David that becomes a messianic prophecy. It begins, verse 1 of Psalm 22 is, my God, why have you forsaken me? So this is significant. This is describing Jesus at the cross. You see how you can easily take this to Jesus. I want to touch on that, but it may be a bit of a stretch, but it'll preach, I'll give you that. Job 25, how much less man who is a maggot and the son of man who is a worm. That is parallelism. You've noticed the connection between maggots and worms. The problem is when we think of worm, we think of the little crawly things that dry up on the sidewalk, or you go fishing with. That is a worm to us. What has in mind here? It's not the fishing worm. It's not that. The technical name is Coccus ilicis. Google it, and good luck spelling it. It is describing what is called the crimson worm, sometimes called the scarlet worm. I'll show you a photo of it. We know exactly what's being described here. You see why it's called the crimson worm. It is more of a grub than a worm. So again, we think of the fishing worm. It's more of a grub. You see that crimson, scarlet, red color. That is significant here. When a female would give birth, which she does one time in her entire life, she only gives birth once, and you'll see why. She attaches herself to a tree, to a stick, to a branch, something like this. And that's probably what you have going on here. And she makes a hard crimson shell, right? So again, that's what you have there. And if you remove that shell, she dies. So the crimson shell becomes like part of her, and she attaches herself to that. And she's going to give birth on this tree. She lays her eggs under her body in this protective shell, and the babies feed on her until they outgrow the shell that she has for them. As a result of that, the mother dies. And that's why she can only give birth once. And when she dies, she oozes a crimson red dye that stains the wood. Here it is. I think you can see it. So what you have is several of these, and the babies outgrow. They leave this looks like a blood stain. It's crimson, scarlet. Now, 3 days later, the dead mother loses her crimson color, turns into a white wax, and falls to the ground. This guy is named after that right there. Now, I don't know. I don't know. Like, you're hoping not, aren't you? Because I'd like to think that if I find that, I know I should call the police, right? That gives me some comfort in life, okay? But if you're in, northern Israel, you're thinking, just the bugs. Yeah. Yeah, it might be. And there are other photos you can get of this stain, but I thought this is sufficient. You got to be careful showing bugs to good folks. But anyways, so where people go with this, and I do think it is a bit of a leap, is they like to lean in on Psalm 22, that the metaphor of the tola, the crimson worm, is then attached to Jesus, who himself sheds as a worm upon his death is the blood of Jesus, right? That may be a bit of a stretch for me. So that's why I just want to present it to you right at the beginning instead of making this some big presentation. So if you're looking for Jesus here, you can have fun with this. But nevertheless, his name means worm. I mean, I do with that whatever you want. Now, what do we know about his family? Well, it tells us son of Pua. Pua means splendid. So his father's name's Splendid, who named his son a grub. And the first Pua was the son of Issachar. So that makes sense. Pua is the son of Dodo, just like the bird, I guess. And his name means his beloved. So you have his beloved gives birth to Splendid, who gives birth to worm. I don't get it. And this is the first time we actually get this name. It'll show up later. It seems to be etymologically related to the name David. David will have one of his guards will be named Dodo or Dada. I don't know. I'd have to look it up in the Hebrew. But what is the history of this guy? Well, first, the first Tola we meet in the Bible is the son of Issachar, who is one of the 12 tribes of Israel, tribes of Jacob. So here he is. I'll get the stained tree off the screen. The sons of Issachar are Worm and Fuva and Job and Shimron. Do whatever you want with that. So that's the first Tola we see. So we have a grandson of Jacob. And so this is really why he's called Tola. It's not because they're comparing him to a worm. I don't know why this guy is called Worm. But no doubt what you have is a family who they're of the tribe of Issachar, and they share these names in this tribe. And all these names make sense in that context. Now, Tola becomes a significant figure. He becomes the progenitor of what's called a Tolite family. So, for example, in Numbers 26, of the sons of Issachar, after their families of Tola, the family of the Tolites. Pua, family of Punites, right? You get the same thing in 1 Chronicles in the list of genealogies. There they are, same names there. So the impression is that that Tola is from the tribe of Issachar, yes, but he's likely from perhaps a prominent family within this tribe. We've seen this with some of the other judges, that the hint is this is a person of some influence. Their family name seems significant. It's probably like David comes from one of those families, probably a fairly wealthy or at least influential family. And so this isn't surprising. And we should note that the tribe of Issachar are described as being the tribe that raises wise leaders. This is important because in 1 Chronicles 12, of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times. That's a fancy way of saying they were wise. They could discern the day and time of what was going on. So the impression we get then is that Tola, we are never told of any battles he fights, any war he engages in, any weapons he preferred, any strategy he came up with. We're just told he saved Israel. Now, and it's connected to Abimelech. Abimelech was a wreck. Remember, Abimelech was a mess. He was a violent man whose end came violently. Remember, the woman dropped a millstone on top of his head off the wall. And so we then transition, okay, this is a time of chaos. Then along comes Tola, the worm. So you get this, my father is king figure to this little old grub worm. And he doesn't stain the ground with crimson blood, if we can push that out a little bit. Rather, he just leads with wisdom. I mean, it's what is so striking about Tola is how nothing seems to be described here. So notice the verbs. First of all, he saved. We're not told how he rose to power, nor are we told how God raised him up. That's common in the other narratives, particularly the major judges. Presumably, he arose shortly after the death of Abimelech, but we're not told that. And regardless, the text tells us he ruled for 23 years, and under his leadership, it seems to be a period of order and stability. And that word saved sticks out to us because of the New Testament. It is used to describe the judges of Othniel, Ehud, Barak, and Gideon. And so it's almost as if he saves Israel from the mess of Abimelech. So it's like he had to be a judge who delivered Israel from another Israelite because things were such a mess. He just stabilized everything. He rose up in leadership. He destabilized everything. Second verb is he lived. He lived in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. We're not entirely for sure where that is. He judged is the third verb there. That is, he ruled for 23 years. This suggests an exact time frame. Sometimes the Bible uses, estimate's not the word, a rounding up. So, like we said, oh yeah, it took 10 years. Well, it may have taken 8.5 years. Could have taken 11 years. It's just rounding. This seems to be a specific number. 23 years he served. And finally, we see that he died and was buried. Now, this phrase, died and buried, is common in Judges. Let me show them to you briefly. Gideon, son of Joash, died and was buried. Jair, we'll see here in a second, died and was buried. Jephthah died and was buried. Ibzan, one of the minor judges, died and was buried. And I think there's two more. Elon, another minor one, the Zebulunite, he died and was buried. Abdon, the final minor one, he died and was buried. So this phrase is often associated with the minor ones, but also with the major ones. And it reminds us of the curse. If you go back to Genesis, the first genealogies in Genesis 5, it says, he lived, he had children, and he died. He lived, he had some kids, and he died. Just over and over and over again. And the point is, this is life east of Eden. So what you're getting is, these leaders, they come up, and they may serve for decades. Here, 23 years. And you get this period of peace and prosperity and stability. Prosperity is really with the story of Jair. But then they died. And what you get a hint at, what is coming next. So let me just, spoiler alert, go down to verse 6. So what you get is, he died and he buried. This is a period of peace. What does it say in verse 6? This is actually, I think, one of the main points of this story. The people of Israel, again, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. You see what the narrative is trying to get you to see? Yeah, you had a brief period of stability and order, but he died. Couldn't conquer the grave. If you're looking for Jesus, this is where I think you'll find it. There's a true and better judge that is coming. One who, like a worm, will, stain the tree with his blood. Let's have fun with that imagery. But this is where I think you'll find Jesus. Even the best of leaders cannot conquer the grave. So their leadership has limitations. Tola seemed to have served with wisdom and honor, but he couldn't really solve what really ailed Israel. So that's Tola. Let's look at Jair, or Yair, probably how it's pronounced. Well, after the worm comes Jair the Gileadite. So let's read his story, verse 3 to 5. After him, so after Tola, arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years, so 23 to 22. He had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys. They had 30 cities called Havoth Yair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. Notice it's cities. There are several cities with this name. And Yair died and was buried in Canaan. So you see that phrase. So you get Tola, you get a period of prosperity and stability. Really, it's stability. Yair is prosperity. So you get, if my math is right, 45 years. This is a full generation. Remember, it's 40 years is a generation in the wilderness wonder. You get a full generation of these two guys. So you get stability, you get prosperity, everything's great. The problem is that it's great when the next guy is as good as the first guy. But that's not always going to be the case. And that's where you pick up in verse 6. So what can we say about this cat? Well, first of all, his name means, may God enlighten. That's an improvement over Tola. I think we can agree on that. He's likely of the tribe of Manasseh, since Manasseh's descendants gained control of a number of Gileadite villages. So he's probably of that tribe. His location is Havoth Yair, which means the towns of Yair. The assumption is that he, or more likely his predecessors, his ancestors, took control of these cities, and it became a family identity. Yair may actually not be a name, it may be a title. But anyways, it may also suggest it's a common name in this area. And that's to be expected because the tribes seem to have preferred names among them. And the time, one scholar suggests, Yair is ruling during the time of Ruth. Now, I don't know where they get that. I would love to see that argument, but I came across that and thought I'd share it with you. You do with that whatever you want. But that is interesting. You remember that in Ruth, there was a drought, they go to Moab, and then they come back to Bethlehem. And you get the story of Boaz and all that. So that may help to see why there seems to be some stability in Bethlehem in order to do the legal stuff to kinsman, redeemer, Ruth, and all that. Well, what is most significant about Yair is, again, we don't know anything about military. We know nothing about fights. There seems to be no enemy against Israel. Neither one of these guys. There's not the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Amalekites, the Canaanites, or those who aren't right. There's just none of them. The closest enemy we've met is Abimelech, an Israelite. And so we get none of this with Tola or Yael. But notice what sticks out whenever we read this is his progeny. So Yair, he rules, but then he delegates his rule to his 30 sons. So you have these cities of Havoth Yair, and they are like governors. So he is the overall judge, if we can use that word, because the monarch language is associated with Gideon, and they're not given that title. So he's like an overall judge, but then there seems to be mayors or governors underneath him, and these are their sons. Now, we call that nepotism, but this was normal back then, that you raise up your sons to take over for you. And so if you're a farmer, your sons take over the farm. And if you're king, your sons take over the kingdom. This was just normal behavior. It's weird to us, but this would have been common. But what is so incredible is he has 30 of them. And he has 30 rulers. Now that tells us Yair practiced polygamy. Obviously. We don't need to explain that. Yeah. We joked about that today at breakfast. Now, being the case, Yair isn't unique in this. Gideon practiced this. Remember that Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. So we go from 70, which is 7 times 10, for those of you who went public school in Owen County. Here we have 30, which is 3 times 10. And clearly he has multiple wives. Now, this gives us some context to what happens with the kings later. David and Solomon and all of them. However, you'll notice that the writer doesn't want us to focus on the polygamy because it doesn't mention the polygamy. It mentions the sons. So what do we have? We go from stability to now we have a new leader who he doesn't have horses. What does he have? His 30 sons ride on 30 donkeys. Now, to us, we think of donkey's the way we think of Donkey and Shrek. Right? They're not, they're just goofy animals. In the ancient world, horses were associated with war. Donkeys were often associated with peace. Both are royal animals. I can prove it to you. I'll give you one verse, and you'll be able to connect it with another verse. Zechariah chapter 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. There's more parallelism. Behold, the king comes unto you. He is just, having salvation, lowly, and riding upon, there's the same word of donkey, upon the colt, the foal of a donkey. Now, where does this verse show up later in the Bible? That's the sign. That's the sign. Now, this verse is quoted by the gospel writers when Jesus comes in the triumphal entry. Behold, your king is coming on a donkey, and they crucify him.
Donkeys are known to be very short-footed, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unless you're a hobbit in Lord of the Rings, you're not going to take them into battle.
Next time he's coming in on a white horse, right?
Because he's not coming for peace, he's coming for war, coming in judgment. Yeah. Who? Who did? You want to burn up the whole city?
Said he came to kindle a fire, he didn't come to bring peace. But obviously he didn't do it.
Yeah, you have to show me that verse. Now, this detail also of the sons and all that connects us with a later minor judge, and that is Abdon, who had 40 sons, 30 grandsons, who rode on 70 donkeys. Now, why is that 70 important? 7 times 10 takes you back to Gideon. 70 nations, going all the way back to the table of nations in Genesis 10. And he judged Israel 8 years. Abdon did, much shorter reign. So what do you have here then is you have a period of almost 50 years of stability under Tola and prosperity. You can't get prosperity without stability, right? This is something we've known forever. If you want to fix your economy, you need to secure your nation. You need to put away criminals, and people need to know they can go outside and run a business. Right? This is common sense. This is why we debate things like immigration and the border and terrorism. And if you go to most criminal neighborhoods in America or the world, you will not find a lot of entrepreneurship. So you start with stability, then you get prosperity. And so this may be the only time in Judges, and I could be proven wrong later, but I don't remember another time in Judges where you get a period like this. Because the story has been the opposite. The story has been, things are chaotic because the people have abandoned the Lord. God brings them down to judgment. He raises up a deliverer, and he starts to bring about stability, but they never get to prosperity. Because that judge dies and is buried, and they turn away from the Lord. And then the cycle begins over and over again. But here, after the chaos of Abimelech, so you had the hope of Gideon, the chaos of Abimelech, you get this brief period of 2 leaders that we're given hardly any details about. We get the important cousins of stability and prosperity. So what is the point here? Why do we have it here, and why is it even in the Bible? Let me mention a few things. One, these brief vignettes set the stage for the larger narrative of Jephthah. For example, so what we're to see is there are elements in these 5 verses that connect us to a later story here at Jephthah. For example, both Yair and Jephthah are from the Transjordan area. So they have similar starting points. Also, the order of both Tola and Yair is contrasted with the chaos of Abimelech and Jephthah. So what you get then is chaos, order, chaos. That's good storytelling. And what that does is because you're overwhelmed with the chaos, it makes the light of the order shine all the brighter. Because this is a deep breath before you're right back into the mess. And so it shows us what Israel could be and should be, even though we know very little about these guys. It just gives us a hint. This is the way it ought to have been. But instead, people turned away from the Lord. But I also want you to notice how both men are contrast to each other. Tola is a worm. Yair is the one whom God enlightens. And yet, despite those contrasts, God uses them to bring about peace and prosperity. Now, this is what every nation longs for. It's what we long for. We hear that phrase, peace and prosperity, all the time here in America. And so it's striking. You have these two very different people, and yet God used them to bring about this one work. Here's the main thing I want us to see. We've talked about connecting it to Jesus and the judge and all that sort of stuff. Here's one of the main things I want us to see, and then we're done. And that is how these 5 verses unveil for us what a missed opportunity Israel had. It's worth noting, again, these men aren't credited with any military feats. These men rule, but seem to do so apart from overt violence. When Gideon ruled, he may have ruled well, although we talked about that. There's some problems there. It came through the edge of a sword. Deborah and Barak ruled, but it came through the edge of a sword, through the winning of a battle. Ehud, the same thing. He outwitted the enemy. So you can maintain stability through violence. You can do that. Virtually every empire in the ancient world did it that way. Alexander the Great would slaughter an entire nation or village so that the next village wouldn't mess with them. Genghis Khan was among the worst at this. Slaughtered untold thousands of people just so that the next enemy won't fight. And you can rule that way. However, that is a hard way to build stability and peace and prosperity. Because if people are afraid, they're not exactly motivated to be part of the system. And so what we get is this brief period without any of that stuff where the Israelites are secure in the lands, at least this tribal area, and they just prosper. So much so that the main leader can have 30 sons. It's a sign of prosperity. It's a sign of blessing because he's fruitful and multiplied. And that they can lead well in their cities. Right? This is the dream. This is what you want. And assuming a chronological order, these 2 men arrest order from the chaos of Abimelech. And so war is temporarily ended. And also the threat of the nations is absent. Combined, they cover 45 years. Yet, they seem to have failed to address the underlying cause of all their suffering. And that is idolatry. This is why I call this a missed opportunity. They have 45 years to address the real source of their problems. They must have thought it was a security issue. We need an army. Must have been an economic issue. We need better tax policy. But the real problem was idolatry. That's why we read verse 6. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals and Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So, disobedience, verse 7, leads to discipline. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. He sold them into the hand of the Philistines, to the hand of the Ammonites. They become slaves again. These descendants of slaves become slaves. And this leads to the story of deliverance, starting in chapter 11, with the rise of Jephthah. So, I got to thinking about this. That this is still a common problem now. So in Judges, discipline is the catalyst for deliverance. At the same time, what we see here is that prosperity is often a catalyst historically for idolatry. Think about it. When people get rich, a nation gets rich, we become very pagan. Any of this sound familiar? Imagine, if you will, if America was a third world country and people were struggling to feed their family, and that state was warring against state, counties against counties, and we live in a very different world. You didn't have paved roads. You didn't have cell phones. It was a struggle to survive because the tribal leader across the street may have your head. Would we spend all of our time talking about sex and cutting up body parts? No. We'd be on our knees, God deliver us from our enemies. Affluency has created a propensity towards idolatry to the point that we think these things are real. So you have 45 years of stability and prosperity, and the people get bored. There's nothing else to fight for. We're making money, we live in nice houses, our kids are well educated, the economy's booming, my retirement will soon be here, and I can just live off of that and not have to work anymore. And what have we done? The new term that's going around, I kind of like, it's called affluenza. Have you heard this? It's affluenza. It's taking the word affluence and influenza together. It's the sickness of affluence, you know. We've got that as Americans. And I think Judges actually is a really insightful book here, because we are in the process of verse 6. We are leaving behind verses 1 to 5. We've had our period of security and prosperity. I think we are in the world of verse 6, which will lead to the world of verse 7. Because we cannot sustain the madness out there right now. We've gone from order to disorder. And you'll find that Yahweh is a God of order. Read the Bible. Read Leviticus. There's a right way to do things. There's a wrong way to do things. We do it this way. The pagan gods, the idols, are gods of disorder. If you don't believe me, try to understand what happened at the start of the Olympics. What you get there is disorder. It's idolatry. It's the worship of the body, the worship of passions, and you only get this in the context of affluence. And that affluence reveals that we are starving at our core. C.S. Lewis has I think it's not Christianity, it may be Mere Christianity. He talks about if you were to go to a theater and you had a performer up there and he had on a stand a freshly cooked fried chicken, I don't know, whatever, steak, whatever you want. And it's covered, right? And he tantalizes the crowd, and you can see a little bit of the chicken. He hides it again, and he does this whole ordeal. And you're watching it, you're thinking, these people are starving. So, okay, so it's not fried chicken or ribeye steak, but it is human flesh that's up there that people are salivating over. What does that tell you? They're starving for something real, love. And that's where we are. So the irony is, as affluent as we are with full bellies and full houses, we are starving for what false gods cannot give us, but we are trusting they will deliver. And we're reading that here, and we're living it here. Nothing is new under the sun. So let me bless you. We were in verse 5, verses 1 to 5. We're now in verse 6. And with that will come verse 7. Disobedience leads to discipline. But the good news of Judges is there is always the hope of a deliverer. Maybe we won't see it in our lifetime, but that is the hope that we have. Danny's not here. No doubt Danny is hanging out with that baby. See, he came to lunch today or breakfast, which meant, he was missing time with that baby. So no doubt he is spending final moments with the baby. Anything else you guys see? It's amazing what you can find in 5 obscure verses in a book. Look, we're not reading it on a daily basis. Let's be honest. But it really is incredible. Lord willing, we'll finish the chapter next week. Let's close out in prayer. Don Lewis, will you close us in prayer?